So, hi, costuming friends. It's Gigi, and I want to welcome you to Cocktails and Costuming. Today, we are not drinking cocktails. I'm actually drinking coffee. And I'm interviewing today Hugh Goffinet of USC Trooper. Before we get into the interview, I just want to tell you our house rules. So, first of all, this is a no judgment zone. So, we meet people where they are, and we talk about the amazing things they're doing, but we don't get judgy about most things. We may get judgy about some things, but it won't be about their clothing, right, or their kits. And the second house rule is spread the love. Like, if you know of someone that you would like to see us interview, please just drop me a line, and I'll reach out to them so we can highlight other POC and neurodivergent people who are in reenactment, costuming, living history. All right, so let's get into our chat. Welcome, Hugh.
Hello, it's good to be here. Thank you.
So first I want to ask you what your handles are. How do we find you on social media?
So I can be found on my living history page, which is, as you mentioned, USC Trooper. That's USCT and then ROOPER. But I also manage on Instagram, Abraham_Lincoln_Battalion, HUSC on Instagram. And that's actually one of the units that I founded on the West Coast. So those are where I can be found at.
Awesome. So what does the USC part stand for?
So it's actually USCT, which is the acronym for the United States Colored Troops, who were the African-American soldiers, the 200,000 African-American soldiers who fought for the United States Army during the American Civil War. So I took USCT and Trooper and I stuck it together.
Smart. I kept thinking University of Southern California, so I wanted to make sure I
knew. Not quite, but close.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about the inspiration behind your work.
So, as far as kind of creating a virtual space to put a lot of my research and to work on my interpretations, actually, I owe that inspiration to my good friend and mentor Marvin Greer and Cheyney McKnight. Their wonderful pages, Mad's the Historian and Not Your Mama's History, were really important in kind of helping kind of figure out how to present, what I know and what I've researched and what I've been able to do for public consumption. I've always been really big on public history, and it was a really easy and cheap way to to actually go about doing that. So yeah, so that's kind of a brief little rundown on how that happened, where that came from.
Okay. So let's talk about your labels a little bit. What are your labels and how did you acquire them?
So I go by living historian. I feel that living historian best kind of captures the work that I try to do, as I focus on public education versus recreations of historic scenes or battles and whatnot. I mean, I do both, but my main focus is that of public education. So connecting living history or doing the virtual stuff that I do on my Instagram pages. That's where I kind of, that label of living historian comes in. In fact, actually, Marvin Greer wrote a really good article on his blog where he actually discusses why he chose to be a living historian versus a reenactor. And that was actually the reason why I made that switch as far as calling myself a living historian versus the other option. But yeah, it just captures the work that I do the best.
Agree. I kind of have been using that term, even though I'm not part of a living history troupe here in America. When I go to Italy, I work with some groups there, and that was the phrase they use, and I thought it fit a lot better. So I'm glad you also found a label that actually fits what you really focus on. How long have you been a living historian, and how did you get into it?
That's a good question. I've been doing this for just about 6 years. I started in December of 2014 officially, but I first got into it in July of 2011. My mother, who is a soldier, as you can see, she took me to the Battle of Port Jefferson in Jefferson, Texas, when we were living in northern Texas at the time. And about this little uniform and this little cannoneer came over and was like, hey, want to join our little cannon crew? And being 9 years old, 10 years old, I was, of course, jumping for joy and really excited to do something like that. And it started my interest to pursue this hobby. In December 2014, I found a group, and that group invited me to attend an event at Fort McAllister in Savannah, Georgia. And for those that know, that's kind of the final moments of Sherman's March to the Sea in the winter of 1864, as he's about to make the drive on Savannah and begin the march up through South Carolina. So they invited me there, and I eventually joined that group just afterwards. And that was kind of where this story kind of begins from. It was a rocky start, but it paid off, and I'm very glad that I was able to get into it. It's been fun.
How do you choose the impressions that you do, and then the history that you work on?
So how I choose my projects, my impressions, and whatnot, the research that I do is really what speaks to me. If it's impactful, I generally tend to pursue it. So most recently, I've tackled the story of African-American quartermasters during the Second World War, and also the work of the African-American socialists and communists that fought to defend democracy in Spain during their civil war in the 1930s. Those two stories and how it relates to the social struggles of the United States during the 1930s, 40s, and 50s is something that gets some attention, but not a lot. Especially, the 1930s African-American, left-wing labor leaders like Harry Haywood and Matt Kode, who, fought for the rights of laborers and low-income African-Americans across the nation, and then went on to defend, the rights of workers and low-income individuals and democracy as a whole on a global scale during Spain and also World War II. Those really just kind of stuck with me, and I thought it was worth discussing it and making sure that other people knew as well.
I agree. So what was your craziest project to work on, and why?
So I've never done anything that's particularly crazy per se, but there is something that I'm proud of that is a little different. I was 17 years old. I was a junior in high school at the time. I'm a freshman in college. I go to Howard University. I did the research for, and I organized an element of an event for Petersburg National Battlefield Park in Virginia. The story was pretty much about the opening stages of the Siege of Petersburg, which began in June of 1864, and I was able to take and promote the history of the African-American soldiers who participated in those opening assaults. We focused on the first USCT, and that research was completely done by me. I was able to bring a small 7-man group from across the country to tell that story. So again, it's not particularly crazy, but I'm really proud of being able to do that during a difficult year in high school. I was 8 hours away in upstate New York, so it was it was a prideful moment for me.
All right, so which historical periods are your greatest inspiration? And you already talked a little bit about the work you do recreating or studying the history of people overseas. But tell us specifically the eras that you're most attracted to.
So I'm most attracted to the 1930s and 1940s and 1950s, especially as it relates to African-American social movements in the United States, like the Civil Rights Movement, which began in the 1950s, or African-Americans during the Depression era, or the Double V campaign of the Second World War. So I draw a lot of inspiration from those stories and veterans like Medger Evers, who went on to become a pivotal player in the early stage of the Civil Rights Movement. And some of those individuals that I spoke about earlier, like Matt Kode. I'll also throw people like Thaddeus Battle, another graduate of HU, which is awesome, who went on to promote some of the labor activities in the United States and defend democracy in Spain. So that's a very brief rundown of some of my inspiring, aspects of history, I guess.
So I'll put all of these names down below, just in case you're interested in studying some of the people that are really inspiring for Hugh. I'll list their names so you can do your own research on them. What groups or organizations do you want to give a shout out to? Who do you participate with?
So I want to give a shout out to 3 groups in particular. The first being the Hannibal Guards, my African-American Civil War group. The second being the Sons and Daughters of Ham, which is more of an umbrella group that the Hannibal Guards exists in, but the Sons and Daughters of Ham encompasses more of the civilian aspect of African American history, primarily during the American Civil War. We're actually doing some good work in other eras as well. Most notably, we're working on an event to tell the story of Sorrel College, which is in Harpers Ferry, another HBCU. And then the third one is the Abraham Lincoln Battalion of the Historical Unit of Southern California, which is something I helped co-found and I still run, despite being in New York State. Those are the three right there.
What is something that I wouldn't guess about you?
So I kind of alluded to it a little earlier, but I am only 18 years old. People often assume that I'm a little bit older because of the stuff that I do, how deeply I am into it, and what I've done in the past. But for whatever reason, that surprises people that I'm only 18. So I guess that's what I'd say for something you wouldn't be able to guess about me.
I would not have guessed, and that's why I'm drinking coffee today. I'm not coffee.
Right here with sparkling cider, so.
But yeah, I think because you started, like you said, you were 9 years old when you kind of got the first taste of living history. So I think maybe because you've been doing it for so long, you do seem very mature in your research and your impressions and your dedication to it. So yeah, I wouldn't have guessed.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So who would you or have you like fanboyed over?
Ooh, that's a good one too. I fanboyed over Fred Hampton, who was the chairman of the Chicago wing of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. He was barely older than me. In fact, I think he was in his early 20s when he was killed by the FBI for the work that he was doing. But he's an inspiration for me as a person who's younger, who's interested in promoting a lot of the causes of African American equality and liberty that he was fighting for in the 60s. So yeah, it's definitely without a doubt Chairman Fred Hampton.
Okay. How were you mentored or helped along the way in your living history journey?
So when I first started this hobby, I had mentioned earlier that it was a rocky start for me. I was actually kind of pulled into the realm of the lost cause. I was living in South Carolina. I didn't really have any Black mentors around me at the time. So I was also impressionable. I was 12 years old, somewhere around there in 2014. So I was kind of duped into this lost cause mythology. So three people, Marvin Greer, James Hayes, and Brother George Hardy, were really able to help reel me in and kind of set me on that right course. I remember James would drive up from Georgia to South Carolina, where I lived at the time, to give me some guidance, and some words of wisdom, which I much appreciate. Marvin would do the same when I moved to DC. He's working in Virginia at the time, and he would come up there and provide me some guidance, some words of wisdom. He'd, take me down to DC. We'd have a good little time out there, and he'd, tell me some things that I was doing that, weren't particularly correct or accurate or, true to the history or amazing, history, and really help instill within me a pride and appreciation for using primary sources versus the word of mouth, which is what kind of got me to that spot initially. And then finally, Brother George Hardy, another graduate of Howard University, he actually he would just sit me down and he would smother me in some good old Black love. And, I appreciated that. He also really helped sculpt me and mold me a lot, again, working more with primary sources and developing a deeper appreciation and interest for Black history as a whole. And I really owe a lot to them, especially Marvin, who really, really, really helped me fine-tune my interpretive skills. I'm still working on it, but it allowed me to snag my first job in the history field at 18 years old, fresh out of high school, only 3 weeks into college. So I owe a lot to them.
I think the two words you can use to sweet talk a living historian the most are primary sources. You say those two words and we're like, what?
Indeed.
Tell us more.
Indeed,
so,
I agree.
What are your goals for the future?
So my goals are simple. Being only 3 weeks into college, I would definitely like to finish my my bachelor's degree. I would also like to enter grad school. Howard actually has a really cool program where if you start doing your sophomore year and you're approved for it, they'll set you up to be on track to get your PhD. And almost, or if not everyone who does that program at Howard ends up getting a fully funded PhD, which would be awesome. If not that, then getting a master's would be amazing, preferably in like museum studies or public history. Because my ultimate goal in life is either work for the federal museum system or to pursue a career in the National Park Service. I love public history, and that's just the best way to go about doing it, in my opinion.
Agreed. I I worked closely with people in the National Park Service during the start of my career after grad school with the Forest Service. I got to know a lot about
Awesome.
kind of our sister agency and all that they do as far as like public history. And they have a great, robust program, lots of opportunities. So that's awesome.
I'm excited about it. It's going to be a really fun career if I can get into it.
Agreed. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
So if you could give new living historians one piece of advice, what would it be?
So I'll start by saying that there's so few of us out there, and that there's just really a lot of misinformation that's been put out, especially at the detriment of the Black community. Because this community, this reenacting, costuming, living history, community was not built for us, but we've still managed to thrive within it. It's important to kind of create your own way and do your own thing. Because people are going to tell you, what you should and shouldn't do, but it's important to make your own way and do what makes you happy, follow your heart. And also just be sure to promote our history, because our collective ancestors were some of the most kick-butt people that ever lived. Tell their story. As the great poet Marvin Evers says, speak the truth to the people, talk sense to the people, breathe them with honesty, breathe the people with love and courage for their being, spare them the fantasy, because fantasy enslaves. That's my little word of advice for those that are trying to come into the community.
Love it. Those are some words to remember. Marvin Evers, another person I will list below, so you can look them up and read those words for yourself. So I think at this point, we're at the end of our show. Thank you so much for being with me here today, just to talk a little bit about what you do.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
I think that a lot of people who watch this are going to be inspired by you and have a better understanding of what living history really means. Because I think there's a lot of, like you said, misinformation about what living historians actually do. And I think we might pull some more people into our, onto the light side, right? Instead of the dark side.
I hope.
So my big ask for everyone else is that you hit subscribe so that you can be notified of all the upcoming content from La Belladonna. Also, hit the thumbs up if you like this interview. Show our guest some love. Follow him on social media. Write some comments below. His handles will be below as well as mine. So thanks for being here with us. Stay safe out there and be excellent to each other.
Take care.